So now it's recording, so anyone who's not here will be able to watch this. So we're just going to begin, and we're going to start with the questions that you guys already posted. Again, we're so happy that Huck Ingram is here with us, and I'm only repeating this because I started talking before I hit record. So he's here, and he's here because he cares, and he truly is one of the good guys and somebody who really does know. And so let's use this time. Let's really make the most of this time. So we'll ask him the questions you posted. Sonnet will begin with that. And then if you guys have other things, and there's no stupid question. So while he's here, let's utilize the time. And then I will give everybody his contact information, because going forward, it can be so valuable and save you so much time and so much money to work with someone up front and spend a little money on, let's say, a template for your agreements. I mean, I know for myself that when I started, and I'll just end with this because I think that this is the pivotal reason why I wanted Huck to be a part of the course when we started it, and even today. When I started making music, I made a huge mistake. The first person I worked with, I paid them all this money up front per track, $3,500 per track, because I didn't know, and they owned half of the song in perpetuity, even though they hadn't written it. All they were doing was arranging it, but I didn't know that at the time. The next person I worked with, I thought I made a better deal for myself because I was only paying $500 up front because this person was less experienced, but I was giving the person back end, and I didn't know what back end meant. So I wound up giving the person publishing instead of money on the master, even though the person wasn't writing the song. And years later, I realized that I'd given the person publishing of my song. Actually, when he said back end, I didn't understand it the way he understood it, which is not a good thing. So he wound up owning my songs forever, a piece of my songs forever. So that $500, which I thought was like, giving me a break, was actually not. And then the third time, I got smart and I worked with a lawyer, and it was really helpful. And I drew up a contract where I was paying the person $1,500 up front, and I was giving them a portion of the master only up into a cap. And that was the best deal that I did. And what wound up happening is it saved me hundreds of thousands of dollars, because some of those songs went on to be in several big ads, McDonald's and Walmart and Target and all these big ads. And the songs wound up getting licensed many times. And I wound up having already paid the person their cap on the first time. So after that, the song was mine, the publishing was mine, it was all mine, which is how it should be. And the money I spent on that lawyer was really helpful, but I wish I would have spent that money early on, because I actually wound up spending a lot more. So anyway, Huck is a good guy. We're gonna start with Sonnet's questions. If you guys have more, let's dive into those too. Okay, so Sonnet, you can take it away.
Okay. First questions is from Nias. We have some really good questions here. I was just looking through them. For Huck, how important is it for an artist to incorporate early on owning music, photographs, logos, and any other IP associated with the brand? Also, should we trademark our brand, our band, and our artist name? I hear major film studios are checking whether brands or bands have trademarked their name before providing them with credit at the end of the film to avoid any legal issues with other bands with the same name. Have you found this to be true? Thank you so much for your gracious sharing of your time in this class and addressing our questions.
So that's a really, really good question. And I think what you'll find is a lot of the questions that you guys have, and a lot of questions that have been submitted, there's not a stock answer for. And every artist, every person in the industry has circumstances that would cause advice to be skewed one way or another. So I'm going to give sort of a very general response to incorporation, ownership, IP, all of that. And then if it snowballs into more specific questions, or if there's follow-up needed, we can certainly dive in a little bit deeper. But as a rule of thumb, what I always tell artists is make sure that you have your ownership ducks in a row. But in terms of business entity structures, grow at a pace that is feasible for yourself. So I've seen too many people run out immediately and try and start LLCs and try and start corporations and try and do all of these things that don't ultimately serve to benefit themselves, because then either they're paying corporate tax or they're putting themselves into different baskets that are really not necessary yet, because the reasons why you would primarily be incorporating would be limiting liability, kind of the big reason. And most of the time, you're not in a circumstance as a new or an independent artist where you're really needing that type of protection. Not always the case. So that's why it's case by case circumstantial. So yeah, in every now and then, it makes sense for an artist to incorporate. If you're starting to get a ton of licenses, you're doing a lot of co-writing with people, and you're worried that maybe there's a possibility for some sort of infringement to step up, or to pop up, I should say, then those would be circumstances where incorporation would be a little bit more valid. But as a general rule of thumb, I say take business formation slowly. And I know that question had like 6 or 7 parts. So I've already lost track of exactly.
No, I think that was pretty good. I would also just to add, if everybody can mute themselves, just make sure we're not getting feedback in between. I think you hit that. Because that makes a lot of sense for what the questions were.
Yeah, you can do business as a sole proprietor, as an individual, as an artist, as a partner, there are so many different capacities for doing business. And one way is no better than another way, unless you have specific extenuating circumstances that would warrant you being different than just yourself. And I know that that's a vague, but it's hard without a specific hypothetical.
I'm just curious, and I feel like I should have asked you this before. Do you feel like there are certain things that you have in mind that are sort of your blanket go-to suggestions for artists that you would want to share before you get into more nitty-gritty questions?
I do have sort of my general playbook for artists in terms of how to make sure that you're protecting your intellectual property and your artistic capital, so to speak. One, I am a very, very big fan of formal copyright registrations. And I think that when we're talking about music, when we're talking about intellectual property in general, we're talking about copyrights and we're talking about trademarks.
Right.
Owning your own copyright registrations is very, very important. And a lot of people have the correct understanding that a copyright does not need to be registered in order for it to be a valid copyright. The copyright attaches at the moment that something is fixed in a tangible medium. So when the song, when the lyrics and the melody are written, when the master is recorded, that's when the copyright actually attaches and you're the owner of it. But in order to avail yourself to all of the rights that a copyright has, it has to be, you have to have a federal copyright registration in order to, for instance, litigate for copyright infringement or receive statutory damages in the event that somebody has infringed upon your copyright.
What's the easiest way? What's the fastest way to do that? Because every time I've been in that process of going to the copyright, the government website is like a very, it feels very slow and heavy and not intuitive. Like, is there a simple way to do that?
So everything's got to be done through the government website. That is the most efficient way, which is sort of unfortunate. You can have attorneys or managers or whomever, they can undertake that process for you, but there's not really a subsequent system for, yeah.
Okay.
So that's one. Go ahead.
Well, sometimes people you can copyright in a group or, like a bunch of songs at once. Can you do that? Do you recommend that, or individually you have to do each one?
So as long as you meet the requirements for actually copywriting songs as a group, it's okay to do it that way. So
Okay.
they have to have all the same writers, and they have to, I don't think that they all have to be on the same album. It's been a little while since I've stepped into that space, but they do have to have all the same writers. So if Sonnet, if you and I write a song together and Cathy and I write a song together, we can't register those songs together on the same registration submission. I have to break it out and register each one separately.
Okay.
So that's sort of step one for sure. And a lot of times people ask, because you may, or I'm assuming that everybody here and everybody listening realizes that every song has two copyrights. There's the composition copyright, which is lyrics and melody. And once you merge those together, they become an inseparable whole as a copyright. So that's the publishing, the quote unquote writing and the publishing. And then there's also the master, which is a separate copyright, and it is copyrightable as a sound recording, which is a completely different application. Sometimes, or I guess frequently, people ask, do I need to register one or both, or do I just register the sound recording, or do I just register the composition? So the lawyer answer is both. You should be registering both. However, I understand that people do different things, and the paramount thing is to get something registered. You want to have something there that's available for you to register.
Okay. Sonnet, you want to ask the next question?
Yeah. Okay. So Steve writes, thanks, Huck, for doing this. Appreciate it. Hi, Huck. 1A. There's multiple parts, so I'll remind you as we go along. 1A, purely from a legal standpoint, what's the relevance, importance of including the lyrics, music components in a song split agreement? If it's simply a good idea, could you explain why from your experience? And
Okay.
B, from a speculative potential legal viewpoint as a music solicitor, what is the answer to the above and why?
Let him know basically everything that was said, what's going down. So I said you need to email facilities, what they do, that you need help over here on the weekends and in the night. You know what I'm saying? I said, you know, they complaining about this certain area, they complaining about the weekend.
Okay. Not sure what's going on, but
I felt a little out of place listening in on a conversation that wasn't meant for me. So in terms of split sheets, first I will say they are incredibly important. They are things that all of you should have in your toolkits for sure. When you're stepping into sessions, they're really, really valuable, and they can save a lot of time and headache on the back end. In terms of specifying, I think that the question was specifying lyric versus music versus melody, or how you're separating those parts out. It doesn't matter, because all of that is creating the song. And what the split sheet is concerned about is the ownership or the control of the song, not the ownership or the control of the lyrics or the melody, because you can't take one out once you put them together. And so even though you might have one person that writes on 100% of the lyrics and one person that writes 100% of the melody and the music, once you put them together, you can't then decide, well, I'm going to take my lyrics and I'm going to go do something over here, and I'm going to take my melody and I'm going to go do something over here. It doesn't work that way. You've created a song that is fused, and you together are the co-writers of that song, and you own it pursuant to the splits that you've agreed upon.
right. Now, what if somebody's in the room and they just write like a lyric, you know? So how do you delineate that?
I'm sorry, I missed that. They just write what?
What if there's like 3 people in the room and one person is just like sitting in the corner and like throws something out and that becomes like the bridge? Do you have to split it 30% each person? You know, 30%? No.
No, you can split, it's contractual. So you can split things however you want and whatever feels appropriate and right. So one thing that I will say that I absolutely love about Cathy and Sonnet is their giving and their sharing. They are so open and transparent, and they really, really want to help people understand and succeed in whatever their passions are, whether or not it's music, or as I'm sure a lot of you listen to Cathy's podcast, it's become much bigger than that, the way that she's inspiring people. And on that same token, I think that when you're stepping into a writing room, you need to be thinking about the goodwill and the juju that you're creating amongst those people in the writing room. So I've dealt with artists who it is their business practice to nickel and dime everybody in the process. So if you've contributed 2 words to a song, they want to give you 1% or whatever it is. And I've also worked with artists who, if you've contributed 2 words to that song, you're getting an equal split from everybody else in the room, because next time you're all together, roles might be reversed. And I might be contributing 2 words and you might be contributing the lion's share. So you can cut things up, you can cut ownership, you can cut control, you can cut anything up however your heart desires. But I think that there's a lot of value in being equitable in all of this, in this whole process.
You're right. Absolutely. I feel like there's so many people who they lose the forest for the trees because they're so short-sighted. They're so afraid of losing that they don't get more, because when you do walk in, it's true. Now, there are times where you have to be careful because there's other people who want to take advantage of you. But if you trust your gut and you choose somebody who you feel has your best interest in mind, then what happens by being generous and everybody showing up to the table and giving it their best, people want to just keep working with you. And in that sense, you get more hands on deck, you get more passion on deck, you get more people fighting your fight. I know for myself, I mean, Kyler, England and I wrote like 90 songs together over 10 years or more. And there was just that understanding between us. There were times where I had written a lot, because a lot of it was for my artist project, and I would show up with a lot of lyrics already done and a melody, and she would sometimes just tweak 1 chord and just add a minor chord to the chorus, or sometimes she would just be a good sounding board and say, like, these 3 lines, like, I feel like you can change it. And other times she would add a considerable amount, but we sort of across the board just split everything. And I think that allowed her to feel like I valued what she brought to the table, and I did, because even if she wasn't changing a lot, having her guidance and her ears to give me that criticism and to give me the thumbs up was really valuable to me, because I trusted her. I trusted where she was coming from. And I think we both brought different things to the table. And sometimes her adding 1 minor chord, as I said in yesterday's listening session, actually gave the song a depth that it wouldn't have had. Or the way that she would phrase the words that I sang, she would just phrase them differently. So I completely agree with you. And that's why I love you and, wanted to have you as part of this, because you also look at the world not from a linear, boxy way, but from a spiritual way, because so much of what is happening in the room really gets completely, stifled and becomes so hostile when you start to even have that conversation. So I really feel like if you're sitting in the room with someone, unless the person's a producer and you want to make sure it's clear, like you're producing the track and I'm writing the track, I feel like if you're both sitting there as writers, it's probably just best to co-write it and just split it, especially if you want to have a long relationship. So I love that you said that. That was a really nice point.
Yeah, I think it's important. And I've been involved in negotiations amongst co-writers.
Oh my God, yeah.
Literally walked out of the room and said, everybody can sue each other if this goes south. Because we're literally spending a fortune to talk about every single possible contingency and to nickel and dime and to squeeze you know, the last bit of juice out of the orange, whatever it is, we're trying to do that up front. And in reality, it's just not, the rights at common law are what the rights are at common law. And if it becomes too challenging to actually enter into an agreement in circumstances where you're paying attorneys to do it for you, it got to a point where I just had to tell my client, you guys can sue each other if it happens.
Totally exhausting.
Yeah, it's a pain.
But I love that basic question, and what you answered initially is that as far as the person you're pitching it to, it doesn't matter if it's the lyric or the melody. They're not going to siphon those pieces apart from one another. The song is the song, and we need to just know who owns it and how the song itself is split, but not who owns the bedroom and who owns the 3 bathrooms, like who owns the house. Yeah,
exactly. And the other thing that there's a lot of confusion about, even among songwriters, is chord progressions. Chord progressions are not copyrightable. Melody is copyrightable.
That's interesting because the Highfields recently wrote something that had the hand jive, dun, 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 you know? So I said, this is like the hand jive. And then Nate said, no, this is a chord progression. This is like a style, and our melody on top of it is different, and our lyrics are different. I was like, really? Okay. I didn't know.
So copyright infringement is an art, not a science. And because this comes up a lot in a lot of circles, people will ask me fairly frequently, hey, can you listen to this? This is what inspired me. Is it too close? Or is it, you know, did I do it good, or is it infringement?
Yeah.
And that is a judgment call that only a judge in a gown can make.
Oh my God, it's that subjective.
It is a challenge.
I thought it was like if there's 7 notes of a melody that's similar, that's not true.
No, that's not true. It is. So there's an intrinsic dissection, and there's basically a balancing of all of the copyrightable elements. So you try and strip all of the non-copyrightable gunk away. So the chord progressions, you try and take all of that stuff out, and then you are basically weighing and balancing the copyrightable elements to determine whether or not something is too similar.
Right.
What I always tell people is the first line of defense is common sense. So if I listen to a song and I can't tell who wrote it, or I think that Tom Petty wrote it and not you, it's probably too close. If I can tell that it's not Tom Petty, that it is you, but it's inspired by Tom Petty, you're probably okay. That, though, is a very, very challenging, it's a challenging determination. And it's not something that there is a really, really, really solid response for vetting.
So what happened with the Robin Thicke case, for instance? How did they know that wasn't just inspired by that?
So the Robin Thicke case, I believe, they found infringement in that case. And, oh gosh, it's been a while since
I'm totally putting you on the spot. I mean, it's not like you did it. It was public knowledge.
It's been a while since, because I think that was 1.5 years ago.
Yeah, it was like.
So what they did is, and I'm gonna step back because I haven't read that case in a pretty long time. I will say that the way that they would handle the infringement claim would be similar to how I just described. They're going to do one, they're going to listen to it and they're going to say, that sounds a lot like Tom Petty. And 2, then they're going to start to strip away the elements that are non-copyrightable, and they're going to weigh and balance whatever's copyrightable and ultimately arrive at their
I
solution.
guess, like you said, you just have to use your common sense, and if you're inspired by something, you just have to make sure that that's truly what it is and it's not a copy. Okay.
Yeah. And as a writer, I think you have a pretty good idea as to when something is or isn't.
Yeah, you do. I mean, it's challenging because you don't know every single song that's ever been written, and there's only 8 notes in the scale. So there's definitely times where you're playing with a melody that's very similar, but then usually if you're not copying it, it definitely is going to change. It's not going to be the same. Sonnet, what's your next question?
Okay. Next question. Well, he's got another one here. Let me just, let's do that one. So Steve continues with the second question. In Australia, we have AMCOS as the optional collector for publishing. We can't create ourselves as self-publishers like the US. Can you elaborate on any potential issues this could create for me if I choose not to engage in AMCOS on my behalf? Would any potential publishing's earnings then be paid to and held by the US body without making its way to the creator, owner, me? The reason I ask is because ACMOS were a little hazy about how much control they assume in relation to the songs as they elect general publisher. The membership documentation potentially reads that they could choose to have a say over the song publishing, and that implies some control in licensing also. Sorry for the length, but I seem yet to hear a well-defined answer to this.
Okay, it's a great question. I don't know if I have a well-defined answer to this, only because I'm not incredibly familiar with the Australian, I guess it's not a PRO, but the publishing, the publishing entity there. I would imagine that they are probably going to be better equipped to take care of your publishing than, well, it's hard. In one respect, I would say I would imagine that they will be better equipped to take care of your publishing than you would be individually tracking each thing down. However, people can't use your music without procuring your licensing, and if you're your publisher, if you haven't assigned or hired anybody to act on your behalf as your publishing administrator or whatever their particular role is, then everybody would technically, in a perfect world, have to go through you to get permission to use those particular songs. So I don't know if that answers the question any better than what you already have. And without sort of a follow-up, if you're on the call, you can certainly follow up and we can have a dialogue.
I don't see him on the call here.
I don't see.
But yeah.
Okay.
I mean, it makes sense because we don't have all the information for them because it's international, but I thought it was a good answer.
It's a good question.
Yeah, really good question. Donald says, this is going to be good. Jesse says, Huck's a good dude. I'm just telling you, we got affirmations here. June says, I signed away my rights to a Dutch publisher, AT Publishing, in 2008 for my first album without putting in the contract to recuperate the rights after a few years with no synchro was done on it. I would like to recuperate them as they've never been synchronized, but they gave me an advance of £3,500 at the time to do my video, and they said they didn't want to give me my rights back unless I paid them that. Is there a way out of this deal that wouldn't be costly, especially when they haven't earned money from every live that I did over the years? I guess because you haven't heard money from any of the songs over the years.
Okay, great question. It comes up quite a bit. There are 2 answers. One, I would need to see your specific agreement with them in order to see if we could find any sort of strategy for getting out of that agreement. There may be possible avenues for getting out. There might not be. It's not automatic that your rights will revert to you. There is something called recapture, but you're talking years down the road anyway. So if this is something that's happened within even the past 10 years, you don't necessarily have a right to recapture now. But it's possible. The other way is a lot of times if you pay back your advance, they'll let you out. And I know that that's not what you want to hear, but it's, you know.
But I love the first thing you said, that you should, there might be a way if you looked at the contract. Like I know for me, one time I was able to get out of something because there was like a key man clause.
Yeah.
Because the person that I wanted working on my stuff had left the company, there was like a way for me to get out. And then there's sometimes like where if they're not, like there's reasonable effort, and like there's sometimes ways of showing that you don't feel there was a reasonable amount of effort or best effort.
Yeah. Yeah.
But,
there are often, I don't want to say there are always ways out of contracts, because if there were, it would defeat the purpose of drafting contracts. But there are often ways that you can creatively arrive. I mean, you know, again, I'm going to go back to the fact that songwriting and music really is a business of relationships. Yeah. That's the way that you become the most successful in this particular industry, hands down. Right. And a publisher, for the most part, doesn't want to have angry artists on their roster. It's just not what makes good business.
Except for Dr. Luke.
Yeah, there are those out there. So, you know, you would be surprised at what you can get done with a very, very nicely worded letter that explains circumstances. Yeah. And at the end of the day, it might be a money thing. Your publisher might just say, look, I'm happy letting you out of this contract, but we gave you an advance that was recoupable, and the only way we're going to let you go your separate ways if you pay us back. That might be their answer, but it might not be. Mm-hmm. So, and there might be other ways out based on the contract.
I love that answer. I feel like my husband and I get into this all the time because he's a lawyer, and so he's very he thinks very like in this one way, and something will happen and I'll be like, well, just talk to the person. It's a relationship. Just ask, just be human. And he's like, that's ridiculous. We signed this. Did you look? You know, even just now he's in New York, and I booked him this hotel through my Amex Platinum because the Platinum gets you certain benefits. And he's like, you're not here with me, so I can't stay in the room. It says I'm reading the paperwork. I'm like, oh my God, just call so I call the guy, and then I'm like, yeah, he doesn't even have the card. Can he use a different Amex? The guy's like, he can actually use any card. It doesn't matter. So he's like, well, make sure you get his name and tell him that, you know, because that's not what it says in the contract that you sign. So I don't look at the world that way. And look, yeah, sometimes people are going to be like, you know, real rule followers, which I just hate rule followers, but like they're going to maybe say no. One time I got to the airport 39 minutes before the flight, and even though the flight had not boarded because there was a delay, they wouldn't let me on because I wasn't there 40 minutes before the flight. And I sat and cried. And I told the woman, I said, if I was famous, you would have let me on. Anyway, so the point is, you can always ask. Doesn't hurt.
You can always ask, and you know, like I said, I really pride the relationship aspect of things. I put a lot of weight on that,
right?
More than most.
Yeah.
I think it's important.
You're a decent person, Huck. You don't just want to argue and sue somebody. You like want to have a conversation.
I do not like arguing. I do not like suing, and I don't really like. I have trouble when people can't work it out.
Yeah.
It's a weird thing for me to be an attorney, because a lot of times I feel like the most anti-attorney attorney.
Right.
But it's really challenging when I get into circumstances where people can't take a step back and just see the bigger picture of what's happening. And I get it. I mean, you know, when we're talking about music and we're talking about art, we're talking about creation, we're talking about vulnerability, we're talking about a lot of stuff that people hold very, very, very close and dear to themselves. And I think that it's really important to, one, recognize that because there's truth in that, but two, realize that we don't all have to be fearful about the way that we interact with other people that are doing the same things.
Awesome. What else, Donna?
I'm going to ask you a question from Christina. She just posted here, and she's on.
Cool.
So when you do a cover of a song on YouTube, so you have to obtain a sync license from the publisher, or do you have to obtain a sync license from the publisher, or for covers on other social media as well?
Yes, you do need a sync license in order to do cover songs on YouTube. You can usually get the publisher to give them to you without really questioning it. They just want to be aware of it, is typically the way that that functions.
So what's the process?
That's the legal answer.
Okay.
I will tell you that an overwhelming majority of cover songs on YouTube have not been done that way.
Yeah.
And there probably is nobody that's actually getting in trouble for doing it that way. But legally, in order to legally be able to do it, you are supposed to obtain sync license permission.
Okay, good. Let's get back to the Facebook questions here. Van says, if a session player accepts the cash for recording on your song, agrees that he does not have any ownership to the master, but fails to give you a receipt invoice for the job, despite you reminding him, have they any legal standing for a challenge on any royalties to the song if it ends up getting a sync deal?
Okay, so that's a good question. Two parts to this question. One is, can somebody do it? And second part is, can somebody succeed at doing it?
Yeah.
And it's really one and the same question, but somebody can always challenge. Always, always, always. They can challenge, they can sue, they can make your life really, really, really unpleasant for a period of time over a particular right or royalty. Can they win at doing that? Well, it depends very much on what that particular relationship and engagement was. So if you have emails where you've sent stuff back and forth and the person said, I don't have any sort of ownership interest on this track, that helps. Did you write them a check? And so you can actually show that there was a check that cleared this individual as opposed to giving them $200 cash. Those are all things that are going to help defend in the event something like that happens. But they're not, the only way to take it to the bank sure is to have your agreements in order.
What about like a back and forth email? I mean, that's dated, and is that enough?
It's certainly better than nothing. It's absolutely better than nothing. It shows where the negotiation was taking place, but you do wind up in circumstances where, what if one person decides they want to say, well, that wasn't me.
Right.
I wasn't the one that was sending those emails from my email address. And, circumstances get weird.
Right. Let me ask you this before, because I was going to ask you something like this at the end, but since it's coming up in different ways, is this something that you would do for people? Is like people could come to you and you could work with them and create like a simple thing that they could use then ongoing, whether it's for their work for hire agreements or with their producers, to structure things? Is that something you can create?
Yeah, so I've worked with a lot of people in this area, and I have a pretty good library of different styles of agreements that can be turned around decently, quickly. And then it's the type of thing where I work with some artists who they want to involve me in everything because they want to make sure that everything's just done and they're not the ones that want to be responsible for it. I've worked for other artists who say, I want you to draft the initial agreement and then I'm going to be producing, 15 artists, I want to be able to use the same agreement, just swapping out. So I've created templates as well.
What would ever do, and you can say no, I'm just totally putting you on the spot, I'm just curious, because if you do it, I want to make it known for people who are in our course. So I recently had to get a trademark copyright for my podcast. So my husband called up this guy who does trademarks, because my Don't Keep Your Day Job, the name of it. So that's what this guy does.
Yep.
So this guy gives these 10-minute free conversations. And I told him what was going on. And then at the end, he told me what I needed. He was like, there's one form that you for sure need. And then there's a second form just to cover your bases, blah, blah, blah. And the form, he had a certain price for creating, filling out the form and then sending it to the government for me. But
Yep.
the 10-minute conversation, I don't know, if you do stuff like that with artists?
Yeah. Oh yeah. I talk to people all the time I really am coming at this from a place of, I want to help people and I don't want to be a barrier to entry.
Right.
So there are so many things that are preventing you as an artist from getting the advice that you want.
I know.
And so I'm happy to talk to people and answer questions as long as everybody is sort of respect. I mean, I can't spend all my time just answering free questions, but I'm more than happy to, pick up
I think to be respectful of your time, I like the idea of it being a 10 or 15-minute call. And then
Yeah.
if something is beyond that, that should be, but that's nice. That's really nice. And I want people to work with you because you're one of the best guys out there. So that's why I want to just show them sort of what you offer and the accessibility so that they know if and when they need something, which most likely you're going to need something to protect you as you move through these contracts, especially with your producers. I find for me, that's where it gets the most interesting. So that's great. They can, and I guess Sonnet, do you want to put his contact information in the chat right now? And then of course we can give it to the class. Okay. So, great. So Sonnet, you want to ask the next question? Wait. Sorry, you're muted. Say that again.
I just entered the email.
Okay, perfect.
Okay, so this one's from Mike Wilson. He is on the call here. We have a couple more Facebook ones too, but I just wanted to make sure we got the people that are on the call. So if a studio has agreed to produce and master the sound copyright for no upfront cost, is it common for the sound copyright split in this type of scenario is done with no cap on total royalties from the sound recording?
So the studio, the other side is always going to try and say why there shouldn't be a cap. And the artist or the individual who wants to obtain those rights is always going to try and say why there should be a cap.
Right.
In terms of what is standard, I would say that this whole cap idea is really something that, from my experience, has started arising in more of the sync space than anywhere else. So, yeah, so caps, I hadn't really seen caps pop up until I started doing a lot more in the sync world.
Mm-hmm.
And people were doing a lot more upfront without receiving anything.
Yeah.
And they were taking more on the back end, but they were trying to figure out an equitable way of arriving at how much they should be getting
right.
in total compensation. Because, when you're talking about caps and you're talking about back end participation and you're talking about any of that, it all comes from somewhere. Those numbers have to be based on something. And so, for instance, if I'm gonna have the Highfields produce a track of mine.
Yes, good idea.
And the Highfields are their standard rate their market rate for producing is $3,000 a track, let's say. And I don't have the money in order to pay them that $3,000 up front. So I go to them and I say, look, if you produce this, I'd be happy to give you 75% of the back end until you reach a cap of, you typically charge $3,000 up front. I can't pay you up front. It's going to come in. There's some, I'll give you a $10,000 cap. So I'll give you, 75% up to a cap of $10,000 because I'm not paying you anything up front.
Right.
That's sort of how my thought process works in negotiating that and structuring that.
Right.
But it's not, it's still much more common for producers to be paid in advance up front and receive, a certain number of points depending upon the clout that they have on the back end. Does that, Mike, does that answer your question? I mean, I know it's.
No, that totally answers that. I think I was thinking as you were speaking that, hiring a lawyer can save you so much more money than having a manager. And sometimes a manager will be negotiating the same thing for you, but then they take lawyers can do that too. They can work on percentage, but hiring a lawyer and paying a lawyer to do something for you and knowing that it's going to cost you X amount of money versus going to be a cut. I've had that in the past where I had a manager who did nothing and they took 15% of everything that I made. And I still had to hire the lawyer because they, got confused, but that was just a side point. But yeah, I think you totally answered the question. And one thing that I think comes up sometimes when we don't know, we just don't know. Sometimes artists are, they are paying up front. And like I said at the beginning of my story, and they're also giving back end.
Yeah.
And like people will say whatever they want. And sometimes people are like, you don't know yet. And so they're saying to the artist who's naive, I created the track. I always get to keep a piece of it. And you're just like, oh, I didn't know that's how it worked. And then you get yourself, in a position where you're being taken advantage of. So, and oftentimes these producers have managers, but you don't necessarily have one yet. So that's not the most, level playing field.
Yeah, it's challenging. And there are, just because I have kind of this kumbaya attitude, and I think that a lot of people in this particular course have a very, very collaborative attitude. And I think that they're really interested in the relationships of it.
Yeah.
That doesn't mean that that's par for the course out in the industry as a whole. The industry can be very, very ruthless in a lot of ways. And so you do have to be on guard and you do have to educate yourself enough so that when you're at the table and your attorney isn't necessarily there with you, you can be effective. And effective doesn't mean being a jerk. It doesn't mean asking for more or stepping on somebody else's rights. It just means confident enough in the subject matter that you cannot be taken advantage of.
Yep. And I will say that what's happened, and this goes back to your idea of that it's so much more important as an overarching concept, which is the relationship itself, because when I finally did get myself into a position where things were really good, and it was several years into my career, not only did I create an agreement that was good for both parties, but it worked so well that after a while, when the recoupments really did come in, I wound up being in a position where the relationship was so strong that the producer said, you know what, you don't even have to give me that small upfront that you were giving me as part of the I wasn't paying the full upfront, I was paying some and then giving some back. Right. After a while, he said, you don't even have to pay the upfront that you were paying at all. Just give me more on the back because It's been going so well. And even still, it wasn't like an egregious amount, but when somebody really likes working with you and the money starts to come in, sometimes you wind up building a relationship that eventually rewards you even more and puts you in a position to have, more leverage even then, because the person enjoys it. It's an easy back and forth flow. And then the songs start to make money. And then maybe, at that point, because you had the long view instead of the short view, now you can make a lot more music all the time, and the person trusts you, and they've seen how your idea worked, and now you can work it even more in your favor.
Right.
So that's exciting, and you can't see that until you just have the courage to step out on faith and trust a little bit, and as well as make a good deal for yourself. But it's that fine balance of giving that other person some respect and not trying to take advantage. At the same time, doing what's right for you. And then as you build a relationship, things start to get much more creative and people start to really come together in a new way and partner and take it on in an even more aggressive way for the betterment of both of you.
Yeah.
So what else on it? What are the other questions?
Okay. Donald says, what is the best way to collaborate, co-write with an artist internationally? What copyright laws apply? What legal laws apply in the event of a dispute? Is there anything to know around this?
Great. Another good question. I would say whatever laws and copyright, intellectual property laws, and just litigation laws of where you are at is what you would like to try and have happen. So, for instance, if I'm in California, no matter who I co-write with, I want California law to apply. I mean, copyright law is federal law for the most part. And so U.S. federal copyright law would be applying in those circumstances. And I would ask that jurisdiction be given to the California courts in order to handle or resolve any issues that I have in general. You're free to agree to apply Canadian copyright. Whatever you want to do. It's just, I think it makes sense as the individual to try and get your laws to apply, since those are what you're familiar with.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. Then you have more control over, what the actual laws are too. That makes sense. He had one more question. Donald says, also wondering, in signing up for PROs, is it best to use your real name, business name, or band name? Does it matter?
That's a good question. I've done so many things with all of the above. I typically use, I'm trying to think how I did the last ones. I want to say that I used legal name.
Keep talking. No one's at my door. Keep talking.
Am I still good? Okay.
Yeah, you're good.
So I think that the last time I did a registration like that, I think that I used legal name, and then there was a way to delineate what the pseudonym was, I believe. I think that that's how it was done. I'm sorry, I don't have, I don't know that it particularly matters so long as everything is consistent. You want to make it as easy for the PRO as you possibly can to collect your performance royalties. But I believe that I did it in the legal name, and then the pseudonym was also listed.
Mm-hmm.
That makes sense. Okay, Maria says, any advice for setting up and structuring side partnerships so that it is in the best interest of everyone involved and doesn't infringe on independent projects that are pursued?
Communicate. I mean, that's the name of the game.
That's it. Yeah.
Is don't leave anything undiscussed. For the most part, the way that a lot of musicians operate nowadays is they have 5 projects happening simultaneously. There's so many different things going on. And I don't think that anybody's offended by people doing 1, 2, 3, multiple things, so long as it's all discussed and everybody's on the same page for how much energy and effort they're going to give to each individual project.
I feel like on the side, you should do relationship counseling, because all of these things you're saying, I'm like, communicate, don't leave anything on the table. I'm like, why don't people just put this into their relationship?
Right, it's true.
I like that.
Okay, go ahead, Sonnet.
Okay. Free J says, I've been collaborating as a producer, sometimes co-writer, on songs targeting ad sync with a 50-50 master ownership split agreement in lieu of production fees. What are some things I should be considering and or include in contracts, i.e. should sync licenses be grantable by either party, producer or artist, or only by the writer, perhaps different names for exclusive or non-exclusive? Should I always register ISRCs under my account? Should there be a clause relating to the SR copyright registration, or other thoughts?
So it's sort of yes to all of the above. You know, the issue, and I hate going back to the same thing, but the issue really boils down to is the relationship of who the artist that you're producing is and what your comfort level with him or her is. There are certain things that you absolutely want to have in whatever agreement you come up with. You want to know who's going to be able to control the master, whether or not both of you are going to be able to, whether or not one of you is going to be able to.
Right.
Whether or not control requires consent of the other person, or whether or not you have sort of a power of attorney to execute licenses on behalf of the other person and just account to them. Those are all things that you want to definitely know. As in terms of what makes the most sense, it's circumstantial, and it's based on your relationship and the individual. So there are certain artists that if I was producing, I hate to say it, but there's no way that I would want them to have the control to do it, because I think that I could do a much, much better job.
Right.
But as the artist that comes to me, or if I'm the artist, there's no way I want the producer to have control, because I think that I could do a much, much better job. So the issue, and this is where it ties into the relationship, is you guys need to sit down together and decide who's going to be responsible for what and how they're going to be responsible for it, and what the specific terms of those engagements are. And I know that that's a really, really vague thing that probably everybody in the room knows or thinks, but it's true. I mean, my personal feeling is that I always give artists control over their things. Even when I'm talking with producers or I'm representing producers, I might suggest that a producer have equal rights in terms of the ability to pitch.
Right.
But I am a huge, huge advocate of artists retaining what's theirs. Now, and what I was getting at is, if you sit with an artist and an artist realizes that the reason why they wanted you to produce their stuff was because they thought that you were in a much better position than they were to actually make something happen with it, then by all means have that conversation and figure out what works for the relationship. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And then that question had a lot of other stuff in terms of other things or other clauses that would be needed in producer agreements. And I feel like I could talk for 30 minutes alone just on that topic. So what I'm going to say is, feel free to reach out to me, and I can engage a little bit more one-on-one about specific clauses or things that might come up, as opposed to just kind of blindly talk about all the things that I typically include in production agreements or producer.
Okay. That's really nice. Thank you. All right. So I have your email address there for anybody who wants to look, and I'll post it on the page as well. Ashley says, should sound recordings be copyrighted before you license them? Do libraries or licensing agents ask for physical copies of one-stop agreements we have with our co-writers?
So I think that you should license songs you should register songs prior to licensing them, for sure. The reason being is certain rights attach once you've registered a song. So in order to get statutory damages for your copyright, you need to have that song registered prior to the infringement, as a rule of thumb, prior to the infringement. And so if for whatever reason someone were to take your song, infringe on it, and you hadn't registered it, you would be limited to actual damages, which are going to be very, very difficult and challenging to prove, whereas statutory damages are just damages as a rule of law. Somebody did this to you and you get a certain amount of damage as a result. So I think that that's really, really important. The second part, one more time, Sonnet.
Sonnet, are you?
She wanted to know if licensing agents ask for physical copies of the one-stop agreements they have with the co-writers.
Sometimes, yes. I mean, yes, but not always. And Cathy probably can speak to this as well because she does a lot of this. But I've certainly been under circumstances where licensing agents or individuals want to see the agreement so that they can make sure that the rights that somebody is representing that they have in control are actually what they say they are, because there can be misperceptions and miscommunications about that. But I've also seen circumstances where licensing agents know the artist, they know the relationship, and they don't need to see that. What you need to realize is that the licensing agent is really putting their neck out on the line when they're pitching your stuff. And if they're telling, whether or not it's brands or music supervisors or whoever, that they have rights to something, in the event that somebody wants to use it, and then the licensing agent has to go to them and say, you know what, the artist actually was incorrect and they don't have the ability to sign off on this, or they can't do it. Yeah, sure, it sucks for the artist because you've lost that sync, but it really sucks for the licensing agent who has probably just blown up that relationship to the point that they may not be doing business there anymore.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, that's only happened to me one time, and it was so unfortunate. The girl who, was in, I guess, I don't want to say at fault, but I guess she was at fault, but she's like a really good person. And I mean, I don't want to divulge about her personal life, but if you knew what she does on her off time and helping kids with disabilities, like, she is such a good person. And she didn't know when she told me she owned it 100%, and she owned the master 100%. She didn't own the song 100%. She didn't control the song 100%. And so I believed her because I didn't know these songs from anywhere else. And so I just pushed it through and cleared everything as if I could clear it, as if I controlled what she told me I could control. And it turned out that half of the song was written by someone who had a major publishing deal. And once the cue sheet was submitted, they got a call from Sony ATV Publishing that they don't understand how that got on the cue sheet because they didn't approve it. And then I got the call, and I've never spoken to that supervisor again. And I, apologized up and down, and the girl apologized, and I wound up like having such stomach pain that night that I thought I had like an ulcer. I was like, this isn't even worth it. And, thank God in all these years, that's only happened once, but it is a horrible, horrible feeling. Sonnet and I just recently, we didn't, but we almost had that happen where we do these things. Huck has been to one of them where we do these like meetups with music supervisors, and we host them in a live theater. And a few people have gotten sync opportunities from them and landed syncs, which is great. But it's a little dangerous because the music supervisors are talking to whoever comes, and some people are in our course and some people aren't. Yeah. And they're telling the people, very generously that they're looking for such and such type song. And then they tell that person to go through us and we'll send it through. And they know that these are not all course members who we know personally. Right. So somebody's song was chosen for a rap spot. It was like a hip hop rap song. And it wound up being okay. But for a moment, I literally lost years off my life, God forbid. But I was so stressed because the person's like, so you just sent me over the information, because all I did, I was now the liaison in between this person who would come to the event. But the music supervisor was associating me with this event and with this person. Yeah. So it was still as if I repped the person. And they only had delineated 50% of the publishing. So the person goes, so where's the other 50%? I go, oh yeah, I'm sorry, I just copy and pasted it. I don't really rep this person. Let me ask the person. So the guy goes, oh yeah, my co-writer lives in Sweden on this song, and I don't even know where he is. And I'm like, oh my God. Yeah. I'm like, they already chose your song. Like my heart's like racing. And anyway, it turned out the guy was like so new to writing. He didn't even have a publishing company. So they just did it under the other person's, and it was fine. But it was so stressful that I told that person, I'm never going to pass anything over for you again, because I almost completely soured the relationship. Even though it all worked out, we live in such a saturated space. We work in such a competitive space that you can't give anyone any reason to think they're going to lose their job. And that's why artists, and it's not that difficult, actually. You just have to know, like, you made an agreement, your co-writer owns this part, but maybe you get to control all of it. Control means they gave you the ability to control it, even though they still own half of it. And things can work pretty smoothly as long as everyone's clear. It's when you're not sure, or you didn't have the conversation, and now the music supervisor is interested, you might actually lose things before you start, because they might get really freaked out that you don't have your ducks in a row. So, you know, like he's saying, and this is why I have him on as part of the course. You know, inside my course, you know, there's all these slideshows and me talking, and then there's nobody else except for Huck, because I feel like the creative is important, and then you need to have a lawyer, because if you can clear things and be professional and have all of that, you know, really together, and your creative is great, you're going to be the go-to person, because a lot of writers haven't really mastered the business side. And when you do it once, like, you get a good agreement and you understand how that pie splits up, you can keep, you know, recreating that for yourself. But having any kind of ambivalence around it is very dangerous.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, it's true. And the other thing is, you know, clearing songs from a supervisor perspective can be a lot of work. It can be it can be very creative in some of the solutions.
Right.
But, you know, when you are trying to place your music, you want to make it as easy as possible for people to consume your music. And having good chain of title, I'm going to call them chain of title documents, even though we're not talking about actual assignments and everything, but having good foundational documents in place really, really help. And so getting back to the question, some licensing agents like Cathy might ask to say, hey, if if this song's a co-write, can you just send over a copy of your co-writer agreement so that I can make sure that everything's good? Right. Or they might say, you know what, I trust that you're okay. It's up in the air.
Yeah. Cool.
Awesome. Okay. Floyd says, this may be a simple question and maybe it's not. Say you did a cover like The Sound of Silence by Simon and Garfunkel. Walk through the steps. Can you walk through the steps or possible scenarios of how you would get permission to use the song and then pitch it? Yeah.
Okay. I can do that. So in order to create and record the cover song, I would go to Harry Fox and I would get permission to record the cover song, because you need to have a mechanical license in order to be able to do that. So I would go to them and I would get permission. Then I would, and the way that fee works is you pay them a certain amount based on the number of copies of the songs that you plan on selling, essentially. Mm-hmm. I would record the song. Once the song has been recorded, then I would have a master of the song that I would be capable of pitching. I could only clear the master. I could not ever clear the publishing of that song. Only the publisher of the original writer could do that. So I could I could have my cover version of the song pitched to be synced, but whoever is interested in syncing it is ultimately going to have to negotiate for the publishing from whoever controls it. And I could agree to waive MFN if I wanted to, so that maybe my version of the song was more more desirable than the original song, because typically the record, getting the master of the original Sound of Silence from the record label is going to be very expensive. So that's kind of the process. But when you're doing cover songs in terms of syncing, it's a two-party process.
That's great. I think that's a question that comes up all the time. I see it a couple of times here, so that's really helpful. Okay, so Robbie sent a video.
Oh my God, he's so cute.
He says, hey, thanks Huck for doing this Q&A. Thanks Cathy and Sonnet. Okay, so he's gonna have a video and we'll just listen to the audio.
Hey everyone, hey Sonnet, hey Huck, thank you so much for doing this live Q&A.
You hear it?
We all really appreciate it. So I'm like, what?
What'd you say?
You can share your screen, can't you?
I just have so many things open on my screen. Okay. Yeah, I can.
You can toggle over to the video.
Okay. Well, hold on. Okay, hold on. We're doing it. Okay.
Question is this: if you were to take sounds from an old video game, and I'm talking like Atari 2600 from the 80s, if you're taking sounds from a game like Pitfall or Pac-Man, I'm sure you'd probably have to contact the company that made those games, but I've tried getting in touch with Namco. Is there another method or another thing that you could do to try and find out who owns the rights to those sounds? Or would those sounds be public domain as of now because it's been X amount of years since the games were created? That's my question. Thank you once again for doing this Q&A. Have a great day, everyone.
I love it. Yes.
Well, that's a good question. I don't believe that the sounds are in public domain yet. In terms of locating who owns those sounds, I would start with, obviously I would start with the video game companies, and it sounds like you've tried that and have not had luck getting information from them. If you have I don't know if we're just talking about like ambient sounds, like sound effects, or if we're actually talking about like, you know, little intro theme song type things or background music songs that are going along with the game as like Mario's running or Pac-Man's eating or, you know, whatever. You might be able to find information on a PRO's site. That's typically when I'm looking for information as it relates to songs. I start with PROs, or if there's a record label involved, you know, those are kind of the ways that I start. I don't know a whole ton in the video game space as to what, especially an old video game, would have done in terms of locating that. That's a good question. I can look into that, certainly, and then I'm going to write it down and then we can engage a little bit further about that.
Great. Thank you, Huck.
Yeah.
It's the last one for the Facebook page, and let's just see if this has maybe been answered already. Hi, Huck. In regards to filing copyrights for our songs, how do I file the copyright for both the sound recording and the song itself, melody, lyrics? Do I just file one copyright for or two? Okay, so I think you kind of answered that one earlier, in that both, you do both. Yeah. Okay, we have a couple here on our chat. Kimberly says, quick question. I did fill out the SR forms on my songs. Will that suffice, or should I also fill out the PA? If so, do I need to have sheet music for the composition? Thanks again.
No problem. Thank you for the question. So the SR form will apply to the sound recording. It'll apply to the master. You need to fill out the other one for the composition. You don't need sheet music for it. You can submit, I think you can just submit lyrics with that. And that should be sufficient to do. But yeah, you want to do both.
Okay. Does anybody else have any questions?
If you guys, if you want to talk, those of you who are on the video, you could just put your hand up. Or some of you don't have. Mike, do you want to say something? I see you.
Hi.
Hi,
How are you?
Hi.
Most of my questions kind of going back have been answered one with the
We can hear you so faintly. Can you turn up your mic?
Oh, of course I can. Is that better?
Yeah.
Look at that. Love game. Just kind of going back to my original question with regards to compensation for a producer willing to do it upfront, no cost. They've done a few deals, and like Cathy had mentioned, most of them say, normally we do like a 10% or 50%. It just varies. But with regards to the cap, I just haven't had this particular producer do a cap before. So if I needed that agreement, that's something you could help out with, correct?
Yeah, that we can talk specifics about any sort of relationship that pops up or any producer that you wind up working with, and we can kind of go from what his or her quote unquote market rate would be on the front end, and then we could figure out what we think a fair cap would be that would keep them, 1, happy, 2, motivated, and 3, wanting more. Because as an artist, you want to keep yourselves in the graces of producers that really want to be working with you. And so, again, it's about just being equitable.
Right.
Yeah.
I
think I didn't get that last. Yeah.
He said thanks. Van, do you want to say something? I can see you. Carlos? No, he's good. Okay. Awesome. Well, there have been like 18 people on the call. There's, I don't know, close to 300 people in the course. So we'll make sure everybody gets this. Huck, do you want to just give your email address and have some final words and where people can find you and sort of what your hope is to come from this vis-a-vis your relationship with everybody?
Sure. So, I really appreciate everybody taking the time to participate. I think that it's really, really important to educate yourselves as best you can in your craft. And one thing that I want to say is the law is something that is not as bright lined as a lot of people would like it to be.
Mm-hmm.
It's not always the case that you can look at something and know exactly what your rights are or are not, which is why it's really, really important to not be scared to ask questions. And even in our discussion today, just when I have general discussions like this, I have to put the asterisk underneath it or next to it, which is, these are my ideas. These are typically the way things function, but I don't know if it fits your specific circumstances as I explained it. And so if you need further clarification before you run out and do something, get in touch with me so that we can have a very, very specific discussion. We've talked about a lot of different topics, all the way from business entities to songwriting rights. We've covered a very, very broad swath, and they're going to have different levels of applicability to different people, and everybody's circumstances are different. So don't hesitate to reach out. There is no such thing as a bad question. The only bad question is the one that does not get asked.
Yeah, true.
And then, what I want to come out of this is for you guys to feel like you have somebody else that you can go to help educate and explain. I feel like if I really truly did a really good job in these circles, I would put myself out of business, because I believe in education more than I believe in doing it all myself. So I'm happy to work with you guys in a way that gives you the tools to actually go out and do it for yourselves. You know, some people will get there more quickly than others, and some people will have the confidence to do that more quickly than others. Other people will never get there, and they'll just say, I'd rather just have you help me and do it for me. And that's fine too. But I don't want the legal component of music and songwriting to be the barrier to getting you the protections that you need.
Mm-hmm. That makes a lot of sense.
And so you can all look at me as a resource. You can all reach out to me. If I'm too busy, I'll tell you I'm too busy. If I'm not too busy, I will sit and talk with you for as much time as I possibly have. And, you know, ask away, get the answers to your questions, and find people like Cathy and like Sonnet that are really interested in watching people achieve their goals.
Yeah, I feel like we are, I was going to say trying, but I don't know if we're trying anymore. I think we are creating something new in an industry where there's a lot of what's mine is mine, and I don't want to share what I have or what I know. I think we're like-minded, and Ari Herstand is similar to me in the sense, like, there's a few of us who really legitimately have been there, and we want to like share what it is that we feel is going to be helpful, and we're not into this like scarcity mentality. And I think we've got to come together, because the world is filled with a lot of negative, and you're such a nice, you know, kind, generous person. And so tell them what your email address is, or what's the best way to contact you.
So you can email me at either huck.ingram@gmail.com or huck@ingramlawoffice.com. Either one I will get. My cell phone number I will throw out there as long as it's respectfully used, but it's 805-895-0019. And so if there's anything urgent that you need, you can get me there as well.
Awesome.
Yeah, don't be a stranger. That's, I think, that the biggest thing is don't be a stranger. And like Cathy said, there really is room for everybody to do what they're passionate about in this industry. Yeah. It is not, I don't get a license because somebody else doesn't. I get a license because somebody wanted my song, irrespective of everything else that's out there. It's just, it's not mutually exclusive.
Right. What's yours is going to be yours. It's like someone can't take your destiny. It's like, it's yours.
Right.
The reason that I think that this conversation is the most important thing in terms of your momentum is because for me, I have just realized how so much happens when you partner with other people. And what happens is your creativity gets expanded because they bring their creativity to the table, but also your relationships now marry their relationships. So, you walk into the studio with a co-writer, and if you can get rid of the fear of the deal, now your co-writer brings a new element to the table. Or your producer has new relationships, and the person that they bring in to play cello is like the best studio musician around, but they're doing that guy a favor, and now you get to work with these people. Or now the producer has a relationship to their own sync contacts. So now their sync contacts are pitching in on behalf of the producer, and you're pitching on, and your sync contacts pitching on your side. So many things can happen. And so I think that making deals is actually really exciting and really important. And the more that we sort of partner and leverage all of what we have, both our talent and our spheres of influence, we can make so much happen. I know one reason why people get hung up and they don't feel like they're able to create the success that they want is because they'll say, I don't have the resources. I don't have someone who can create the level of music I want. I can't find a producer because I can't spend that kind of money. But what if you really could master how to orchestrate an agreement so you could find someone who you thought was incredible, whether that person already had tons of credits or whether that person is brand new, graduating from Berklee School of Music, but really gets it, really gets it, and actually might be even faster on Pro Tools than the other person. This person just might not have as many credits, but if you understand how to structure a deal, that gives you the freedom, that gives you the sense of confidence. Now you can start messaging people on Facebook, you can chat with a friend and say, who did you work with? Start sending emails, start making phone calls, and connect with people because you feel free and certain that you're gonna be able to orchestrate something that even if you don't have $1,000 sitting on the table, that there might be something that you can bring to the table and you can work with this other person and set it up in a way where you feel like you're gonna return what it is that the person is investing. I think that's really powerful and that's really exciting. And I never would have been able to get to where I am if I hadn't worked with all kinds of people, from co-writers to, you know, work for hire musicians to producers, for sure. And the having the great track, you know, to meet the good song is really important. But there's tons of good producers who can make incredible stuff on their laptops. You just might not have the $1,000, but if you have a vision and you have a plan and you're really enthusiastic and passionate, and you can put together a deal where you can say, I'm going to bring you along on this plan. I want to write this song with this opportunity in mind, and once something hits, you're going to be compensated 3 times what you would have been if I would have had the money now. Not everyone's going to say yes, but there might be a few people who will say, okay, I can do it the last Thursday of this month because I didn't have anything going on anyway, and you sound pretty sincere and pretty together in terms of how you want to get this done. You're not like some artist who sleeps till noon and doesn't really know and really wants me to give you a favor but doesn't really know how to put this together to make it worth my while. You want to make someone feel like you can protect them and you can make sure that you're going to return what it is that they're investing. And by doing that, that's going to open up so many doors. So this person who's sitting here with us today, he's giving us this time for free. He really does care about you. And I think that sometimes the last thing I want to say is, like, people won't necessarily call. They won't necessarily email him, just like people won't necessarily reach out to every licensing agent or do it more than once or reach out to a music supervisor or go up at the end of a panel and shake somebody's hand. There's sort of like this feeling of like imposter syndrome, or you're not deserving, or you feel embarrassed. Sometimes you might just not need it. But I wouldn't let that stop you, because something I've learned in my life is that just taking a chance and being a kind person and sending an email, I don't always get a response, but he's actually offering you this time, and you never even know what's going to come out of that conversation. I mean, sometimes you work with an attorney and you get a deal together, and in the process of even that relationship, the attorney says, oh, you know, I know a producer who's awesome who does indie music. I should connect you guys. Like, I just happen to know this person. So it doesn't hurt to have good guys on your side. And I'm glad you guys were here for the call, and we've already, you know, taken up enough of your time. So that's going to be it for the day. Thank you so much, Huck, for joining us. We really appreciate it. Thank you, Sonnet, for moderating. And we'll sign off, and Sonnet will post the information he just said about himself in the Facebook group. And
yeah, thank you. And definitely reach out. There's a lot of clarification, even just based on, you know, the questions and the conversation that we started. It really is the tip of the iceberg. There's, you know, I mean, it's tough to answer questions that are sort of posed out of context. So if you're one of the people that asked the question, if you feel like, gosh, you know, I appreciate Huck taking a stab at it, but I still have this other question, or it didn't get to the heart of it, I will not be offended if you shoot me an email and say, Huck, I still have this question. Can you give it to me? And I'd be happy to talk to you about that as well.
Awesome.
So, yeah.
Okay.
Thank you guys.
Great. Thank you guys. Thank you for being here. This is recorded. We'll post it in the group for people who weren't here. Have a great day, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.